The biting winter air of Rico, Colorado territory, stung Adelaide Gabrielle's cheeks as she urged her chestnut mare forward through the gathering storm. It was 1876, and the silver mining town nestled in the San Juan Mountains had been her home for only 3 months, 3 lonely, desperate months since her father's passing had left her with nothing but debts and a struggling general store on the edge of town. The snow had begun falling at midday, but Adelaide had delayed her return from delivering supplies to the Henderson homestead until the last possible moment. The extra dollar misses Henderson had pressed into her palm would mean the difference between heating her small rooms above the store tonight or shivering beneath every blanket she owned. "Just a little further, Maple," she coaxed, leaning forward in the saddle as the path narrowed along the ridge overlooking the valley. The mare's hooves crunched through the fresh powder, her breath billowing white in the frigid air. Adelaide pulled her woolen scarf higher across her face, her fingers stiff within her gloves. The fading daylight cast long shadows across the trail, transforming familiar landmarks into menacing silhouettes. The first indication of trouble came when Maple's steady gait faltered. The mare snorted nervously, her ears flicking back and forth. Adelaide tensed, scanning the surrounding pines for signs of predators or bandits. The trail ahead appeared clear, but the light was tricky, the snow creating a deceptive blanket over the ground. "Easy, girl," Adelaide murmured, patting the horse's neck reassuringly. "We're almost home." They rounded a bend in the trail, and Adelaide saw the reason for Maple's hesitation. The path ahead sloped downward, the recent snowfall concealing what was clearly a sheet of ice beneath. She pulled back gently on the reins, considering her options. The alternative route would add an hour to her journey, time she couldn't spare with darkness falling and the temperature dropping. "We can manage this," she decided, guiding Maple toward what appeared to be the safest section of trail. Nice and slow. The mare moved forward reluctantly, each step careful and measured. Adelaide held her breath, keeping the reins loose enough to allow the horse to find her footing but ready to respond if needed. For a few moments, it seemed they might navigate the treacherous stretch without incident. Then Maple's back hoof slipped. The horse whinnied in panic as her legs splayed outward, and Adelaide felt the sickening sensation of falling. She gripped the saddle horn desperately as Maple fought to regain her balance, but the mare's front hooves lost purchase on the ice as well. Adelaide's stomach lurched as both she and her horse began sliding toward the edge of the trail where the ground fell away sharply. A shout cut through the air. "Hold on!" The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Adelaide caught a glimpse of movement, a blur of brown leather and determination, charging toward them from further down the trail. In the chaos of the moment, she registered only the broad shoulders of a man as he lunged for Maple's bridle, his boots somehow finding traction where the horse's hooves could not. "Whoa there." The stranger's voice was steady, commanding as he gripped the leather straps, using his weight to anchor the frightened animal. Maple's desperate scrambling slowed, and the man maneuvered himself between the horse and the dangerous drop-off. "It's over," he said firmly, his breath visible in the cold air as he maintained his hold on the bridle. His eyes startlingly blue against his wind-burned face met Adelaide's for the first time. "You're all right, both of you." Adelaide's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized how close they'd come to disaster. The stranger kept one hand on Maple's bridle while offering the other to Adelaide. "Let's get you down from there," he suggested, his voice gentler now that the immediate danger had passed. "That ice patch runs another 20 feet. Not safe to ride across." Adelaide nodded, still too shaken to speak. She took his offered hand and dismounted, her legs trembling beneath her as they touched solid ground. Only then did she get a proper look at her rescuer. He stood nearly a foot taller than her own 5 feet 4 inches, with shoulders broadened by years of physical labor. Beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, His face was all angles and plain strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, straight nose, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to take her measure in a single glance. His coat was well worn but of good quality, marking him as neither destitute nor wealthy a working man who took care of his possessions. "Thank you," Adelaide finally managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "No need for thanks, madam," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "William Yates at your service." "Adelaide Gabrielle," she returned, then gestured to the mare who had calmed considerably under his steady hand. "And this is Maple." "Pleasure to meet you both, though I wish it had been under better circumstances." His gaze shifted to the darkening sky. "Storm's picking up. Where are you headed, Rico?" "I have rooms above Gabrielle's general store," William nodded. "That's a good 4 miles yet, and this trail gets no better ahead." He seemed to consider something before continuing. "My cabin's just beyond that stand of pines. You're welcome to wait out the worst of it there." Adelaide hesitated. Accepting the hospitality of a stranger, particularly a male stranger, went against everything she'd been taught about propriety. Yet the alternative was risking another fall on the ice, possibly in full darkness. "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think it necessary," William added, seeming to read her thoughts. "But that's no night sky forming up there, that's a blizzard coming in from the high country." As if to emphasize his point, the wind gusted suddenly, driving stinging particles of snow against their faces. Maple shifted nervously. "Very well, Mr. Yates," Adelaide decided. "I accept your offer with gratitude." William nodded once, then turned to lead Maple carefully around the ice patch, with Adelaide following close behind. The trees offered some shelter from the wind as they made their way down a smaller trail Adelaide wouldn't have noticed on her own. After about 10 minutes of careful progress, a cabin came into view in a small clearing. It was modest but well built, with smoke curling from the stone chimney and light visible through the single window. A sturdy lean-to shelter stood adjacent to the main structure, large enough to accommodate a horse or two. "Let's get your mare settled first," William suggested, leading them toward the shelter where a bay gelding already occupied one side. Adelaide helped remove Maple's saddle and bridle while William fetched water and hay. The mare seemed content enough once unburdened, particularly when introduced to her new neighbor. "That's Copper," William explained, patting the gelding's neck. "Best trail horse in the territory." The wind howled outside as they secured the shelter, and Adelaide was relieved when William finally led her toward the cabin's door. He stomped his boots on the small porch before entering, and she followed suit. The interior was warmer than she'd expected and surprisingly tidy. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace that dominated one wall, casting flickering light throughout the single room. A bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner, a table with 2 chairs another. Simple shelves held books, cooking implements, and various necessities. It was unmistakably a bachelor's dwelling, but showed care in its maintenance. "Please make yourself comfortable," William said, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. Without the bulky garment, his frame appeared leaner but no less strong. He wore a simple flannel shirt tucked into well-worn denim trousers, with suspenders over his broad shoulders. Adelaide removed her own coat and scarf but kept her gloves on until her fingers could warm properly. She moved closer to the fire, extending her hands toward its welcoming heat. "I was just about to prepare some coffee," William offered, already moving toward the small cast iron stove in the corner. "And I've got some stew I can reheat if you're hungry." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Yates." "William, please," he said, filling a pot with water from a bucket near the stove. "Or Will, if you prefer. Mr. Yates makes me look over my shoulder for my father." Adelaide smiled despite herself. "William then, and yes, coffee would be wonderful." As he worked, Adelaide took the opportunity to study him more carefully. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to taking care of himself. His hands were calloused but deft as he stoked the stove and measured coffee grounds. "Have you lived in Rico long?" she asked, breaking the silence. "About 3 years now," he replied, glancing over his shoulder. "Came out after the war looking for something different, worked the mines for a spell, then started doing carpentry work when my lungs couldn't take the dust anymore." "You're a carpenter?" William nodded. "Among other things, built this cabin myself, do repair work in town, some furniture making when there's call for it." He gestured toward the table and chairs. "Made those too." Adelaide looked at the furniture with new appreciation, noting the careful joinery and subtle details she'd missed at first glance. "They're beautiful work. Thank you." He seemed pleased by her observation. "And you, the general store is yours." "It was my father's," Adelaide explained, a familiar ache settling in her chest at the mention of him. "He passed away 3 months ago, heart trouble. I'm sorry for your loss." The simple words carried genuine sympathy, and Adelaide found herself continuing. "We came west from Philadelphia last year. Father thought the mountain air might improve his health, and he'd always dreamed of adventure." She smiled sadly. "Mother died when I was 12, so it was just the two of us. When Rico's previous shopkeeper decided to return east, Father saw it as a sign." William placed a steaming cup of coffee on the table for her. "That takes courage, starting over in a new place." "I'm not certain it was courage so much as necessity," Adelaide admitted, taking the offered seat. "Father's medical expenses had depleted our savings and his business partnerships had soured. The move west was partly to escape creditors. Still takes grit to face the unknown," William insisted, sitting across from her with his own cup. "Many wouldn't have made the journey at all." Adelaide warmed her hands around the mug, considering his words. She'd never thought of herself as particularly courageous. Practical, yes, determined when necessary. But courage seemed too grand a word for simply doing what needed to be done. Outside, the wind's howl intensified, punctuated by the rattle of sleet against the cabin's windows. William rose to add another log to the fire, then moved to the stove where he uncovered a pot of stew that had begun to simmer. "You'll stay the night," he said, more statement than question as he stirred the contents. "Trail won't be passable until morning at the earliest, and that's if the storm blows over quickly." Adelaide knew he was right, though the prospect of spending the night in a stranger's cabin, a male stranger at that, made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. What would the townspeople think if they knew? Her reputation, already precarious as a young, unmarried woman running a business alone, would be irreparably damaged. As if sensing her discomfort, William spoke again. "I'll sleep in the lean-to with the horses. There are extra blankets in the trunk at the foot of the bed." "I couldn't put you out of your own home," Adelaide protested. "I've slept in worse places," he assured her with a small smile. "The war taught me that much at least." The mention of the war piqued Adelaide's curiosity. "You fought for the Union," William nodded, a shadow crossing his features. "Massachusetts 54th. Enlisted in 63 when I was 18. Saw things no man should see." He fell silent for a moment, lost in memories before visibly shaking them off. "But that's long past now." He ladled the fragrant stew into 2 bowls and placed one before her along with a spoon and a chunk of bread. "Eat while it's hot. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep your strength up." The stew was simple but delicious venison with potatoes, carrots, and wild onions, seasoned with herbs Adelaide couldn't quite identify. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the storm's fury providing background to their quiet meal. "You have family in Rico?" Adelaide asked eventually, curious about this solitary man who seemed content with his isolation. "No family to speak of anywhere," William replied, breaking off a piece of bread. "Father died before I was born, mother passed when I was 16, no siblings." "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Long time ago now, made my own way since then." "No wife?" The question slipped out before Adelaide could consider its propriety, and she immediately regretted it. "Forgive me, that's not my business." To her relief, William didn't seem offended. "No wife," he confirmed. Came close once back in Massachusetts after the war. Elizabeth Harrington, daughter of my mother's employer. We had an understanding, or so I thought." He paused, and Adelaide sensed there was more to the story. After a moment, William continued. Her father had other ideas. Found her a match with a banker's son, better prospects than a carpenter with nothing but war wounds to his name. She chose security over sentiment. Can't say I blame her. "I'm sorry," Adelaide said again, hearing the lingering hurt beneath his matter-of-fact tone. "Water under the bridge," William replied, finishing his stew. "Probably for the best. Elizabeth wasn't cut out for frontier life, and I couldn't see myself returning to Massachusetts." Adelaide nodded, understanding more than she could express. Her own brief courtship with Jeremy Blackwell, her father's business partner's son, had ended when the family fortunes changed. Jeremy's letters had grown increasingly infrequent as her father's health deteriorated, until they stopped entirely just before the move west. The wind gusted violently outside, rattling the window frames and sending a shower of sparks up the chimney as the draft disturbed the fire. William rose to check that everything was secure, then added more wood to the fireplace. "Storm's settling in for the night," he observed, peering out the window into the swirling darkness. "Good thing we got the horses under shelter." Adelaide finished her meal and insisted on helping with the washing up, despite William's protests. They worked side by side at the small basin, her washing while he dried and put away the dishes. The domestic task felt strangely intimate in the confined space, their elbows occasionally brushing as they passed items between them. With the chores complete, an awkward silence fell. Adelaide was acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation, despite William's honorable offer to sleep elsewhere. "I should prepare the lean-to," he said finally, moving toward a trunk where he began gathering extra blankets. "Make sure you keep the fire built up through the night." Wood stacked by the hearth. "Thank you for your kindness," Adelaide said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." William paused in his preparations, regarding her seriously. "I believe things happen for a reason, Miss Gabrielle. Perhaps I was meant to be on that trail today." Something in his steady gaze made Adelaide's heart flutter unexpectedly. She looked away first, moving to stir the fire unnecessarily. "Adelaide," she said quietly. "If I'm to call you William, you should call me Adelaide," he nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Adelaide, then." He gathered his blankets and moved toward the door. "I'll check on you and the fire in the morning. Sleep well." After he'd gone, securing the door behind him, Adelaide stood in the middle of the cabin feeling strangely bereft. The space seemed emptier without his presence, despite its small size. She moved around the room, examining the details of William's life, the books on his shelves. Practical manuals alongside volumes of Thoreau, Whitman, and surprisingly, Shakespeare. The carefully crafted furniture, the sketches of building designs tacked to one wall. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her curiosity. She removed her boots and outer garments but kept her dress on, too mindful of propriety to undress completely even in solitude. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the quilt heavy and warm. As she drifted toward sleep, lulled by the storm's persistent rhythm against the cabin walls, Adelaide found herself wondering about the solitary carpenter who had very likely saved her life that day. The morning brought stillness and blinding whiteness. Adelaide woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly to find William already moving about the cabin. "Good morning," he said, nodding toward the stove where coffee brewed. "Storm broke about an hour ago, left nearly 2 feet of snow, but the sun's doing its work already." Adelaide smoothed her hair self-consciously, aware of how disheveled she must look after sleeping in her clothes. "Have you been up long?" "Since dawn," he confirmed, pouring coffee into 2 cups. Checked on the horses, cleared a path to the lean-to. Trail to town should be passable by midday when the suns had time to soften the worst of it. He brought her a steaming cup and Adelaide accepted it gratefully. I should return as soon as possible. People might worry if the store doesn't open. William nodded, understanding her concern for her reputation. I'll escort you back once we've had breakfast. True to his word, they set out for Rico shortly after sharing a simple meal of flapjacks and the last of William's preserved summer berries. The landscape had been transformed overnight, familiar features buried beneath pristine drifts. They traveled slowly, William leading the way on Copper with Adelaide and Maple following in the path he broke through the snow. The sun climbed higher as they made their way toward town, its warmth creating a glittering effect on the untouched snowfields surrounding them. Despite the difficult conditions, Adelaide found herself enjoying the journey, occasionally catching William looking back to check on her progress, his expression softening whenever their eyes met. As the first buildings of Rico came into view, Adelaide felt a curious reluctance to return to her normal life. The unexpected adventure with William had been a respite from her daily worries about the store's finances and her uncertain future. They reached the back entrance to Gabrielle's general store just as noon approached. William dismounted to help her down from Maple, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment, they stood closer than propriety allowed, neither immediately stepping away. "Thank you again," Adelaide said softly. "For everything." William nodded, his blue eyes searching hers. "It was my pleasure, Adelaide." She expected him to leave then, to return to his solitary cabin and his carpenter's work. Instead, he cleared his throat and asked, "Might I call on you sometime? Properly, I mean." The question surprised her as much as it pleased her. "I would like that very much." His smile, the first full, unguarded smile she'd seen from him, transformed his serious face. "Sunday, perhaps." "After church services?" Sunday would be perfect, she agreed, her heart lighter than it had been in months. William tipped his hat, then mounted Copper with the easy grace of a man who'd spent much of his life in the saddle. "Until Sunday, then." Adelaide watched him ride away, standing in the snow long after he'd disappeared around a corner. Only when Mrs. Peterson emerged from the neighboring millinery shop did Adelaide remember her circumstances and hurry inside to prepare the store for belated opening. The days until Sunday passed with excruciating slowness. Adelaide found herself distracted as she served customers, her thoughts constantly drifting to William's cabin and the unexpected connection she'd felt with its owner. Several times, she caught herself staring out the store windows, half expecting to see him riding down the main street. By Sunday morning, Adelaide was a bundle of nerves. She'd pressed her best dress, a forest green wool with modest lace collar, and spent extra time arranging her chestnut hair into a becoming style. As she walked to the small church at the end of town, she tried to calm her racing heart, reminding herself that she'd spent an entire night in William's company already. There was no reason for such girlish excitement. The church was nearly full when she arrived, the entire community having turned out after being housebound during the storm. Adelaide slipped into one of the rear pews, scanning the congregation for William's tall figure. Her heart sank when she didn't immediately spot him. Halfway through Reverend Thompson's sermon on perseverance through trials, the church door opened quietly. Adelaide turned with the rest of the curious parishioners to see William entering, his hat in his hands and his hair neatly combed. He wore a clean shirt and what appeared to be his best coat, not new by any means, but well maintained. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and he gave her a small nod before taking a seat in the very last pew. When the service ended, Adelaide remained seated as others filed out, knowing William would find her. Sure enough, he made his way to her pew once the crowd had thinned. "Miss Gabrielle," he greeted her formally, mindful of the lingering parishioners who might overhear. "I hope you're well recovered from your adventure." "Quite recovered, thank you, Mr. Yates." she replied with equal formality, though her smile was warm. "I hope you'll join me for Sunday dinner. It's nothing elaborate, I'm afraid. I'd be honored." They walked side by side through Rico's snowy streets, maintaining a proper distance between them, though Adelaide was acutely aware of his presence beside her. Several townspeople nodded greetings, curious eyes taking in the unexpected pair. Adelaide's rooms above the store were modest but comfortable, a small sitting area with a cast iron stove, a compact kitchen space, a curtained-off bedroom, and a tiny washroom. She'd spent all of Saturday cleaning and preparing, determined that William would find everything in perfect order. "It's not much," she said as she ushered him in, suddenly seeing the space through his eyes, the faded furniture brought from Philadelphia, the patched curtains, the worn rug covering the plank floor. "It's a home," William replied simply, removing his hat and coat. "That's what matters." The meal she'd prepared was simple roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread she'd baked that morning, and apple pie for dessert. William ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting her cooking with genuine enthusiasm. "This is the best meal I've had in years," he told her, accepting a second helping of pie. "I get by with stews and simple fare, but this—" He shook his head in admiration. "This reminds me of Sunday dinners when my mother was alive." "I enjoy cooking," Adelaide admitted, "though it seems excessive to prepare proper meals just for myself most days." "That's the hardest part of living alone," William agreed. "The quiet gets to you after a while." Their conversation flowed easily as they lingered over coffee, moving from childhood memories to books they'd read to hopes for the future. Adelaide found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn out of her shell by William's dry humor and thoughtful observations. As afternoon shadows lengthened into evening, William reluctantly rose to leave. "I should get back before dark," he said, though his expression suggested he'd rather stay. "The trail can be tricky at night, even without fresh snow." At the door, he hesitated, then reached for her hand. His palm was warm against hers, the calluses evidence of his labor. "Thank you for today, Adelaide. May I call on you again?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she answered honestly. His smile was answer enough, but he added, "Wednesday, perhaps? I have business in town." "Wednesday would be wonderful." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it, then set his hat firmly on his head and departed. Adelaide watched from her window as he collected copper from the hitching post and rode away, raising his hand in a final farewell as he reached the edge of town. Wednesday brought William back to Rico, ostensibly to deliver a repaired rocking chair to Mrs. Thompson, the Reverend's wife. He appeared at the general store afterward, purchasing items he could easily have done without a new shirt, coffee beans, though he mentioned having plenty, a book of poetry Adelaide had commented on admiring. This pattern continued through February and into March, William finding reasons to come to town, Adelaide always welcoming his visits with barely concealed delight. Sometimes he would help her with small repairs around the store. Other times, they would simply talk as she attended to customers, William leaning against the counter in a way that suggested to everyone in Rico that his interest in Adelaide Gabrielle was serious indeed. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Mrs. Peterson from the millinery shop made a point of mentioning what a fine, hard-working man William Yates was. Old Mr. Harmon, who played checkers outside the barbershop most days, winked at Adelaide whenever William was in town. Even Reverend Thompson made a subtle reference to the virtues of matrimony in a sermon that had Adelaide blushing to her roots. By April, the snow was retreating from the valleys, though it still capped the surrounding mountains. The first wildflowers were beginning to appear in sunny meadows, and the days grew noticeably longer. Adelaide's business improved with the weather as miners returned to the area, and families ventured out more regularly. One particularly fine Saturday, William arrived at the store just before closing time. Instead of his usual work clothes, he wore a clean white shirt with a string tie and had clearly taken extra care with his appearance. "I thought you might like to join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant," he suggested, a hint of nervousness in his usually confident demeanor. "If you're not too tired, that is." The Grand Hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Rico, not truly grand by Eastern standards, but respectable and the closest thing to formal dining the small mining town offered. That William would suggest, it indicated something special about the evening. "I'd be delighted," Adelaide told him, her heart beating faster at the implications. "Give me a few minutes to close up and change." She hurried upstairs, selecting her best dress, a blue silk she'd worn only once before at her father's funeral. It seemed fitting somehow to reclaim the garment for a happier occasion. She pinned her hair up in a more elegant style than usual, and even dabbed a precious drop of rose water behind each ear. When she returned downstairs, William was waiting by the counter, turning his hat in his hands. The look in his eyes when he saw her made all her efforts worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The hotel dining room was busy but not crowded. Heads turned as they were seated at a table near the window overlooking the main street. William ordered for both of them the finest steaks the establishment offered, with all the accompaniments. As they enjoyed their meal, Adelaide noticed William seemed preoccupied, answering her questions distractedly and twice losing the thread of conversation entirely. Just as she began to worry something was wrong, he reached across the table to take her hand. "Adelaide," he began, his voice low and serious, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." She squeezed his hand encouragingly, her pulse quickening. "For me as well, William. When I found you on that icy trail, I had no idea how much my life was about to change." He took a deep breath, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "I've been alone for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to care for someone, to worry about their happiness, to want to share everything with them." He reached into his pocket with his free hand and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I'm not a wealthy man, Adelaide. I can't offer you luxury or grand adventures, but I can promise to love you, protect you, and work every day to make you happy." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band with a small, perfect sapphire. "I made the setting myself," he explained, suddenly uncertain. "If it's not to your liking, it's beautiful," Adelaide whispered, tears filling her eyes. William slid from his chair to one knee beside the table, heedless of the other diners who had fallen silent to watch. "Adelaide Gabrielle, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" There was only one possible answer. "Yes, William, yes, with all my heart." The dining room erupted in applause as William slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her cheek, chastely propriety still observed even in this emotional moment. News of their engagement spread through Rico like wildfire. By Sunday morning's church service, there wasn't a soul in town who hadn't heard. Congratulations poured in from all sides, along with well-meaning advice and more than a few knowing looks from the matrons who had predicted this outcome from the beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning. The wedding was set for early June, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they'd have to endure an extended engagement. William threw himself into expanding his cabin, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main living area to accommodate married life. Adelaide, meanwhile, sorted through her father's affairs with renewed vigor, determined to settle all outstanding matters before embarking on her new life. To her surprise, she discovered that the store was in better financial condition than she'd believed. With careful management, she'd managed to reduce her father's debts significantly. "I've been thinking," she told William one evening as they sat on the porch of his cabin, now their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "What if we combined our efforts? The store could sell your furniture alongside the usual goods. You could have a workshop behind the building." William considered this, his arm around her shoulders. "That could work well. I've had more commissions lately than I can manage from out here. Being in town would make it easier." "And we could live above the store," Adelaide continued, warming to the idea. It would save us the daily journey, especially in winter. But we'd keep the cabin, William added, as a retreat, somewhere to escape when town life becomes too hectic. The plan took shape between them, each contributing ideas, making compromises where necessary, building their future together piece by piece. June arrived with perfect weather for a wedding. The small church was decorated with wildflowers gathered by the young girls of the town, who had adopted Adelaide as something of a role model, a woman who had faced adversity with grace and found happiness on her own terms. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. Mrs. Peterson had helped with the alterations, adding fresh lace to the collar and cuffs. William, for his part, had invested in a new suit, the first he'd owned since before the war. As Adelaide walked down the aisle toward her future husband, she remembered that icy day on the mountain trail, how close she'd come to disaster, and how one man's timely appearance had changed everything. William's eyes, watching her approach, held the same steady reassurance they had when he'd caught Maple's bridle and told her everything would be all right. Reverend Thompson's ceremony was simple but moving. When it came time for the vows, William's strong voice carried clearly through the church as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Adelaide for all the days of his life. Her own voice trembled slightly as she made the same promises in return, overcome by the significance of the moment. The celebration afterward was the largest Rico had seen in years. Tables were set up in the street outside the hotel, laden with food contributed by every family in town. There was music from a hastily assembled band of miners with unexpected talents, dancing that continued well into the evening, and enough well wishes to last a lifetime. As night fell and lanterns were lit, illuminating the festive scene, William led Adelaide away from the celebration toward the store that would now be their home together. They had decided to spend their wedding night there rather than at the cabin, saving that journey for the following day when they would have a week to themselves before returning to regular life. The rooms above the store had been transformed in Adelaide's absence that day. Fresh flowers filled vases on every surface. The bed was made up with new linens, a wedding gift from Mrs. Thompson, and a bottle of champagne chilled in a bucket of ice, courtesy of the hotel proprietor. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," William said softly, lifting her into his arms to carry her over the threshold. Adelaide wrapped her arms around his neck, marveling at how natural it felt to be called by her new name. "Thank you, Mr. Yates, for everything." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Adelaide rested her head on William's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked softly. His hand stroked her hair gently. "I never used to. Thought life was just a series of random events, good and bad." "And now," William was quiet for a moment before answering, "now I think some things are meant to be, like a carpenter being in exactly the right place to catch a runaway horse on an icy trail." His arms tightened around her. "Like finding the person who makes you feel complete when you didn't even know you were broken." Adelaide raised herself up to look into his eyes, visible even in the dimness. "I love you, William Yates." His smile was tender as he pulled her closer. "And I love you, Adelaide Yates. More than I have words to express." The years that followed proved the wisdom of their partnership, both in business and in life. The combination of Adelaide's merchant skills and William's craftsmanship made Gabrielle and Yates' General Store and Furniture Works the most successful establishment in Rico. They expanded the building twice to accommodate growing demand, eventually employing 3 apprentice carpenters and 2 shop assistants. Their personal happiness grew alongside their business success. In the spring of 1878, their first child was born, a son they named James after William's father. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Adelaide's mother. Their third child, another boy they called Thomas, arrived in 1882, completing their family. The cabin outside town remained their special retreat, a place they would escape to when town life became too demanding or when they simply wanted time alone as a family. William added rooms as the children grew, and the sound of laughter filled the space that had once known only solitude. Through the inevitable challenges, harsh winters, fluctuations in the mining economy that affected the whole town, childhood illnesses that brought sleepless nights of worry, William and Adelaide faced everything together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. On their 10th wedding anniversary, William surprised Adelaide by closing the store for the day and taking her back to the spot on the mountain trail where they had first met. The path was clear in the June sunshine, bearing no resemblance to the treacherous ice that had brought them together a decade earlier. "I wanted to thank it," William explained when Adelaide asked why he'd chosen this location for their anniversary picnic. "This spot, this bend in the trail, it gave me everything good in my life." Adelaide leaned against him, watching their 3 children playing nearby under the watchful eye of Mrs. Peterson's daughter, who had come along as helper for the day. Who would have thought such happiness could come from such a frightening moment? William's arm around her waist tightened affectionately. "That's life, isn't it? The best things often come disguised as disasters." Looking at her family, the strong, kind man beside her, and the beautiful children they had created together, Adelaide couldn't help but agree. She thought of all the seemingly random events that had led to this point. Her father's decision to move west, his untimely death that had left her alone, the winter storm, her decision to take the shorter trail home, Maple's slip on the ice. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd taken the longer trail that day?" she asked. "If we'd never met on that icy patch," William considered this, his blue eyes still as striking as they had been the day they met gazing toward the distant peaks. "I think we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Different circumstances, perhaps, but the same outcome. How can you be so sure?" He turned to her, his expression serious. "Because I can't imagine a life without you in it, Adelaide. Any world where we exist must be a world where we find each other. It couldn't be otherwise." The simple conviction in his voice brought tears to her eyes. After 10 years, William still had the ability to move her with his unadorned honesty. She leaned up to kiss him, unconcerned about the children who might see or the propriety that had once governed her every action. "I love you, William Yates," she whispered against his lips. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days that follow." His answering smile was as warm as the summer sun above them. "And I love you, Adelaide Yates, more with each passing day." As they gathered their family for the journey home, Adelaide took a final look at the bend in the trail. An ordinary spot on an ordinary mountain path, unremarkable to anyone passing by. Yet for her, it would always be the place where everything changed, where a frightening moment turned into the beginning of a lifetime of love. The wilderness of the Colorado Territory had tested her in ways she could never have imagined back in Philadelphia. It had taken almost everything from her, only to give back so much more. Strength she hadn't known she possessed, a community that had become family, a love that had transformed her life, and the beautiful children who represented their shared future. As William helped her onto Maple, the same faithful mare who had inadvertently brought them together, Adelaide felt a profound sense of gratitude for that winter day when her horse had slipped on the ice and a kind stranger had caught the bridle, telling her with quiet confidence, "It's over, you're all right." He had been right in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Everything had turned out more than all right. It had turned out perfect. The Yates family rode together down the mountain toward Rico, toward the life they had built from that chance encounter. The afternoon sun cast long shadows before them, but their path was clear and their hearts were full. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else since that fateful day together, with courage, with determination, and with an abiding love that had begun in a moment of crisis on an icy mountain trail. In the years that followed, Rico would grow and change with the fortunes of the mining industry. Some would come seeking their fortunes, others would move on when dreams didn't materialize. But through it all, the Yates family remained, their story becoming part of the town's folklore, how the young shopkeeper and the solitary carpenter had found each other through chance or fate or divine intervention, depending on who was telling the tale. And on cold winter evenings when snow blanketed the San Juan Mountains, William would often stand at the window of their home above the thriving store, watching the white flakes swirl in the lamplight, and whisper a quiet thanks for ice storms and slippery trails, and all the dangerous, wonderful circumstances that had given him the life he'd never dared to dream possible.